Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar and demonstration. I'm Rich Martin, Senior Technical Marketing Engineer at Itential. And today we're going to be talking about and looking at how to automate network change management processes with Itential and ServiceNow. So in this demonstration, kind of the four key components, we're going to go through a lot, but four of the key components that I would like for everyone to walk away with is, how to apply logic and what we call transformations with ServiceNow to create kind of more advanced automations that we've been talking about previously in the last episode of the series. Also, how to integrate, we start to integrate real-time notification of ServiceNow tickets into messaging systems. This is a really nice quality of life, and we'll show you how you can get that done. And then understanding the advantages of reusable workflows and transformations for ServiceNow. So we'll talk a little bit about reusability in all of these elements within our platform, because they really do end up saving you a lot of time, especially as you work not just alone, but with other folks on your team. So your colleagues can create things that are reusable. You can create things, workflows and automations that are reusable. And then it really helps you to focus on other parts of the automation. And then finally, as we conclude today, we're going to talk about how to now publish an automation in our platform so that it can be accessed in different ways. So it could be accessed as a service catalog entry within our platform for the team to use, or kind of leading up into further sessions on the ServiceNow idea is how to maybe make that available so that it's a ServiceNow catalog entry itself that gets run in our platform from ServiceNow. So for the demonstration, just conceptually, things will change a bit because we want to show and highlight the different steps so that we can help everybody to understand everything that's going on. But we're in the demo itself, we're going to show a network change, maybe starting from a form, transforming that data using this transformation technology that we have. And then integrating with ServiceNow. So opening tickets, updating ticket statuses as it's necessary and as it's useful within the workflow. And one of the advanced concepts here is how to query, not just reading or writing to ServiceNow in a sense where we're creating and updating, but also reading status from ServiceNow to understand if a specific ticket, like what is its status right now? Is it part of is it at the point in its state so that we can start to implement a change? And if it is, then going through and making a network change itself, and then updating the ticket as needed, verifying the change, and then finally closing out the ticket. And so the concept is that. So how do we now integrate ServiceNow into our workflows, into your network workflows within the platform to save even more time and make your processes more efficient? And with that, let's get right to the demo. Let me share my screen here. Okay, so as always, I like to start simple. I like to start with the foundational concepts that allow us to understand the context that we're building upon. And so that's what I'll start with today. So we talked about in the previous session, really kind of the three and really only two fundamentals here. So once you onboard ServiceNow into the Itential platform through its API, you get access to all of the API calls that are available and onboarded. And really the two we're going to be working with. So if you think of three functions that we want to kind of sprinkle into our network automation workflows that are relevant to your day-to-day processes, opening up a change request ticket in ServiceNow. So that's this task right here. And this task itself, so every task in a workflow is going to require certain variables, right? So data in and data out. Always think about data in and data out when it comes to a task or a step or a box in a workflow here. So if I click on variables, this particular change request, create change request task is going to require the following variables. So in order to create a ticket, really we need very little. If you look at this adapter, this is more focused on Itential, just specifying which adapter to use. You can have multiple ServiceNow instances or multiple instances of different IPAMs, things like that. So that's always going to stay static here. But what what's different is this body. So in this case, I am passing to ServiceNow, whenever we run this to create a ticket, I am passing to it a very minimal bit of information to create the ticket. In fact, I'm passing to it a variable called summary, and that's set to a string called network change request. And what that actually does is that tells ServiceNow to map that string called network change request to the short description. And it's not very descriptive. We're doing that on purpose so that we can show how updates work. But anyway, that's required for a change request. So that's one function. The next function you want to sprinkle throughout your network automations is probably the one that's going to be used the most, quite honestly, and it's updating a change request ticket. So data in for creating a change request ticket, we're giving it a minimal amount of information, but the data out is going to include some very important information for us. One of those bits of information is going to be the ID of the ticket that was just created, right? So we want to be able to use that ID and capture it in the automation so that we can use it for subsequent tasks. So what is a subsequent task that might need it? Updating the change request ticket itself. So let me reload here. And if we look at update change request ticket and we take a look at the variables it requires, you minimize that too. It's not like the create change request ticket that had the body that was required. Now it's actually asking for another one called the change ID. And this is the change ID string that the open ticket or the create ticket API call is going to output. So we want to be able to capture that so that we can use it for this subsequent API call to update the ticket. And when we update the ticket, we're talking about updating documentation, updating certain fields, or even updating the status. All use the same API call, update change request. And what I mean by that is now when we close a ticket, so those are kind of the three functions. We want to be able to open a ticket, update a ticket, and close a ticket. You'll notice for the close change request ticket, it's the same API function call called update change request. But in order to close a ticket, it still requires the change ID, right? So it still needs to know the ticket we want to close. But in this case, we can pass to it a set of variables that identify the new state that the ticket should be moved to. So in this case, state 3 is known as closed based off of the definition ServiceNow uses. And then we also have to set two other fields here called code close or close code and close notes, right? And I'm setting that to successful and change completed. So when you pass that data along with the change ID string, which came from this call, it will close that ticket out, assuming the rules on the ServiceNow side allow you to do that. So that's a whole other situation with policy and rules on tickets and things like that on the ServiceNow side. But functionally, how we do it in our side is using these three primary methods of doing it. So again, usually you're creating the ticket at the start of a workflow. You're updating as the workflow goes, as new data is captured, maybe from the network, maybe from other sources. You can update that ticket. You can update the state. Ideally, updating the work notes because the work notes themselves are part of the documentation process. Once you've done multiple updates to the workflow, then eventually closing the ticket if everything is appropriate and correct. And so those are the three things we're going to use in this series of demos today. So let me move forward to the second one, this next demo. So this next demo, I do want to highlight a couple of things, and we're going to walk through this one step by step so everybody gets a good understanding of how this works. So in this case, here's your open change request ticket that we talked about just a moment ago. We're also going to do an update here, another update here, and then finally a close at the very end. So that's what I mean. If you had this as a workflow without ServiceNow, you could run the workflow, but you would be at that point manually. Before you run the workflow, I'm gonna open the ServiceNow ticket. I'm gonna swivel chair over to that dashboard, type some things in, click some things, and then do that. And then I might have to update it as more data is known about the nature of the change or the type of change, or in the midst of before I make the change, but the nature of the change, maybe pulling information from IPAMs, things like that. I might have to dashboard over there, pull that information in, go back to ServiceNow, update the notes, update the documentation, the work notes, things like that. that could be an API call that you sprinkle into your workflow. We hope that's the way you do it, because we want to take that those processes and steps which aren't directly network related, but still process related before you can even do any networking work. So if we can do that, then we can save times, even with those simple things, opening up a ticket and even doing rudimentary ticket update based off of data that we can gather through the workflow, saves you an incredible amount of time. So we start with opening that ticket request, right? That's going to give us a minimal amount of information. Um, then the next step here is we're going to get input from a form. Now, this input could easily come from an IPAM system. It could come from a source of truth of some sort, any of this input, what we're talking about. So if the network change we're going to do here is to create a loopback address on a router, because that's a very simple thing to do. Where does that data come from? So if just for our demonstration here, it's going to come from a form. So the question is, what is a form? I'll show you. So the form that's being specified here is called ServiceNow or Snow Form Demo 1. And I have that form pulled up here. So Snow Form Demo 1 on this tab, we have a form. We have the ability to create forms, different types of forms, and this is a JSON form. So when you've created it and saved it, it's saved as a single file JSON object that can be reused. Again, reusability is key. And I can take any of these elements, drop them in here, fill them out, and now create things like drop downs. This is a static drop down. I could create a dynamic drop down by using an API call, maybe to find out the inventory within the platform or somewhere else, and populate that in a drop down. Forms are really, really, really flexible. And so a form is, when we display this form, it will halt the automation at this step to allow somebody to input data that will be used for later in the automation steps, in this case for making a network change to a loopback. So I can define all of these. I can pre-populate these fields with data to help create some guardrails and steer people to the right direction, or at least give them an example on what this ought to look like. Since this is also a JSON object itself, we can do some JSON validation to ensure certain fields match. Like for instance, we can create these IP address and net mask fields to be IPv4, and we can validate within the JSON that the user entered a valid, dotted quad notation, or it won't accept the input. So that's what a form is. So I've created this form to get the relevant information from the user about subsequent that are needed for subsequent steps in the automation. So in this case, you'll see a lot of network related stuff. What's the router we're going to make a change on? What's the description? What's the interface? IP address, net mask, all the basic things we need. And then in the same form, I'm also going to ask for very specific ServiceNow information. Now, this might not be necessary in a production workflow, but for being able to have some data to update, I'm just going to include those here. So we need a test plan, we need an implementation plan, we need a backout plan. So those will be inputted here from the form and then updated in a ServiceNow ticket. And here's the interesting thing. From this form builder, I can take a look at what the form is going to look like when it's displayed. And one of the critical things here, if I click on this form data, oops, I got to actually fill this out. It's actually validating input that was required. If I show the form data, this is the actual data format that's going to be passed when this particular task is completed. And this is important because when we start talking about transformations, the format of this data and how we manipulate data is important for us to conceptualize and understand. So thinking here is, we're going to show the form, we're going to get the input from the user is going to click, submit, and then that task is going to make this data available in this particular format, and this format is a JSON object. So that's a form. So now let's flip back over to our automation. What's our next step? We're going to show that form. Now we want to format that some data. So in using a transformation, so you can see the underlying call here is called transformation. So this is the transformation technology I referred to. So I'm going to show you what this transformation looks like, but to conceptualize it, I kind of hit upon this earlier. Think through how you would manually do processes for a network change. So we need to make a network change. interface. We want to configure an interface on a router somewhere. I have to know where that data is, right? First of all, maybe I need to open that ticket, right? So then I open the ticket in ServiceNow, and it creates the ticket. And the one piece of information I really, really want to know and save is the ticket number. So I maybe copy that and I paste it into my notepad. And then I go over to the IPAM system, and maybe I need to ask the IPAM system for the next IP address net mask that's relevant for this particular piece of equipment, right? In the next interface. So type some things in, click some buttons, boom, it comes back with some information. So I need to copy all that information because I need to manipulate it and use it later for when I actually make the change. So I copy and paste that into my notepad. Eventually I get to the point where I need to use all this information in other systems. So if I SSH into the router, now I need all of that information that I pulled from the IPAM system, that IP address, just port description, all that information that I pulled from there. Now I have to manipulate it and put it into the format that's required for the CLI commands to make that change. So you're doing this process manually in your head using tools like copy and paste, Notepad, things like that. So the JSON transformation, we call it JST, or JSON schema transformation, or just transformation to make it simple, looks like that process. Now, I know this is complicated. I'm going to walk you through because we're going to see some simpler applications for this later. But this is all about data gathering and manipulating that data so that it can be used further down the line. Just like you gather data from the different sources that are needed, you hold them somewhere, maybe in your notepad, you paste them in there. If you're very advanced, it's Notepad++. And then you use that later. Maybe you manipulate it within Notepad, or maybe you copy and paste on the fly, but you're manipulating that data in the format for CLIs or for updating tickets. And that's exactly what we're doing here. So that first step where we created that ServiceNow ticket, this is the data that it returns back. And it's a ton of data, right? Not everything is relevant to what I want to know. And really, the only things I really want to know is the ID for the new ServiceNow ticket that gets created, right? So it's an ID number that is used to reference an update. So remember when I showed you the update change request call, it required that ID. This is where that ID comes from. So we're going to capture that and we're going to map it directly. So this is your outgoing schema. So this is input. So this is data sources coming in. This is data sources that we're going to make available to tasks going out. So anything beyond this particular task can now use these data bits that we're creating in this transformation. So I'm going to create a variable called ID, which is a direct mapping from where it came from originally. The other thing I'm going to grab from here, from the create ticket in ServiceNow, is I'm going to grab this number, because this number is useful for formatting a URL that can be a clickable link right into ServiceNow, because it's going to use a slightly different format. So I'm going to pull that from there. And really, that's all the things I'm concerned with for that data source. So that's one data source coming in. I can actually have another data source coming in as well in this transformation. And this is the data source that's the form. So remember that form, I showed you the form and how we could view it and how it would output that data. Well, this is that data being output. So this is how we expect and identify that data coming in. So it's going to match to this format. And that format can be determined from me clicking that button that showed the form and showing the output of that form. So this is the data format. And now I can pull from this and map directly. So these variables I know later I'm going to use those for making a network change. This variable, which contains the ID string, is specifically going to be used for every single update, and the close ticket as well, which is also an update technically. Now, what am I doing here? Now, here's the cool part. Because this is transformation, we can actually use these methods here on the left, and every one of these sets of methods allows me to drag in a method, drop it in here, and use it to manipulate data. So in some cases, your data is not a one-for-one match. The thing coming out of ServiceNow may not be the thing that it needs to, it may not look like the thing it needs to for the next task later down the road. So then what we want to do is we can use any of these tools, drop them here, and manipulate that data to put it in the right format for the next thing. So the next thing that I'm building here and using this thing called template literal is a update to ServiceNow. So I want to do an update to ServiceNow, and I want to pull some information from here, from the sources, modify them in a format that matches the update, the expected format for this ServiceNow change request update. So the template literal is a really nice one. This is one of many, because I can take multiple variables and put them into a different format, many times just as a human readable kind of a string. So in this case, I'm making a human readable format that has all the data from the form, right? So, because this is the work that's about to happen on a specific core router name that comes from the form, a new interface. In this case, it's the loopback interface. So these are variables that come from this form data with this particular IP and this particular net mask. So now that gives you a little more human readable format of the change that's about to take place. And what I do with that change is, if we follow this line here, I map it to the ServiceNow update summary string. So the original summary string we created in the create ServiceNow ticket, it was a very bare bones, like, network change request. Now we've gathered more information to the nature of the network change request, and now I want to update that summary string with something actually relevant to the change. So that's what I'm doing here. And then other information are coming directly from the form data. So the backout, the test plan, the implementation plan, things like that. I can create also a new string here. So this is one of these methods here. Drop that in there, and I can define a new string called network and map that to the category for the ServiceNow update. So that is actually going to update the category of change request to network, because by default it's set to something else. And so that is it. This is going to be the most complex transformation that we see today. And if you can understand that, then you've got the foundation of it. And again, to put it into maybe more human understandable methods, it's the same thing you do in a manual process every single day, captured in this. And now this transformation actually becomes reusable. Anytime I have a form that has this kind of information, and I'm creating a ServiceNow ticket, I can actually use this transformation to output this data for tasks somewhere else. So you'll start to notice, as you build these things and colleagues build these things, you're going to be reusing these things over and over and over again, which also saves you a lot of time. Okay. That was this step, format ServiceNow. Then we finally have the information to update that change request ticket. So remember that template literal that's going to format everything to update that change request ticket. Then we're going to go to this step, which is view data. Now, this is a manual step that halts the workflow. We're doing it simply to give us an opportunity to stop the workflow. And in this case, we stop the workflow and pop up a message that basically says, wait until that ServiceNow request has been approved before you continue. Because what's the next step from that? Make network changes. So this is still a manual process. This automates everything up until the change actually has to be made. So it creates the ticket, pulls information from different sources, updates the ticket. Then you actually have to wait for the approval. And yeah, you would have to go in and go into your ServiceNow dashboard and wait for the approval to happen. And then you can come back into here, click continue, and then it's going to continue down that route. So we'll see that in a minute. Then we actually make the network change, and we're doing that in a child job. And I'll talk a little bit more about child jobs in our next demonstration, but that's where we make the network change. And then we want to verify that the network change that was made actually got made. And we're going to use something called a command template here. So what's a command template? If you've tuned into some of our previous sessions, whether it's from ServiceNow or other sessions where we're showing more network changes and things like that for the automation, you'll know that a command template is a way for network guys without any previous experience to enter in and start providing some really valuable input as far as pre-checks and post-checks are concerned. When in regards to making changes to CLI devices. I'll show you what I mean. So what I want to pull from here is this is the command template that we're calling here as a step in this task. And so I've got that here. This is the command template, ServiceNow webinar post check. And so when you look at this, you'll see very, very immediately, if you're a network-centric person, Cisco CLI guy or gal, you'll notice here that show interface, and this looks a little strange because it's a variable, but you'll see the show interface command, which is identifiable. This is a post check. This is a verification step. You can also use these as pre-checks, but for the simplicity in the demonstration, I'm just using it as a verification post check. So if we actually make the network change, we're creating this loopback interface. How do I know from a network engineer's perspective, not even thinking about automation right now, how do I know that that change was legitimately made? Well, I would go into the CLI and I would do a show interface, whatever the loopback interface was, and then the output of it should show me, at the very least, it should show me that it's up, right? So that's exactly what this does. Here's the command we run. This is variabilized, and I'll show you where that variable comes from in a minute. But hint, transformation, because we need data into this. And then the rule here says the output of this command must contain the string that loopback interface is up. That's exactly, if we're doing if we're doing a stare and compare manually, that's exactly some of the things we're looking for. Now, this is a simple single rule. We can continue with more rules for that particular output. I've done in the past where we look for the IP address to make sure it matches. I haven't done that here because I want to make it quick and simple. We can also additionally create more command boxes like this, so I can execute other commands other than show interface. Maybe I want to show the routing table and look at something in the routing table. All of that is available without writing any code. Network engineer can sit down, do this, build this valuable pre-check or post-check conditions, save it, and now this is a reusable asset that can be used in an automation. Okay, so hopefully that made sense. Where does this variable come from? In order to make this dynamic, meaning if I just put a static loopback address here, it would only be useful for one loopback, right? Loopback, whatever. But I want to make this a variable. So where does that variable come from? Well, ultimately, it's going to come from a transformation. So this is the transformation. So let me flip back here. Here's the run command template, but the step before that is to format the data for this verify step. So that again is a transformation itself. So now let's take a look at that transformation. So in order to get the correct dynamic loopback name, where does that come from? Originally, it comes from the form. That's where it's going to be inputted, and that's what we're doing here. We're taking the input. So once that form task is done, that data is available in this format. So that format matches this and now allows us to use this transformation to access that data from the form and extract the only things we need. In this case, we can extract the loopback address, and I'm also extracting the IP address, but we're not using it in a template, but we could use it. And that becomes a variable now that can be used. And so that variable for the loopback address will now be replaced with the actual data that was entered into the form, passed through this transformation because we're extracting that data, and then given to as the input to the task for that run command template. So after the run command template is finished, we're going to get the verification results. So the run command template is going to say, okay, I'm going to run this command template. You set up the rules. If that interface exists and it shows it's up, then I'm going to come back with a certain amount of data. And one piece of that data is to show that it either passed or failed that condition, or true or false, right? True meaning it passed, false meaning it didn't. So in order to do that, we have to get the results itself, and we're going to run that through a transformation so that we can use that output and format it into a method that is useful to the update change request ticket, because I want to take the results of the run command template, and I want to use that to update the work notes for the change request. So this is what this transformation is. Again, hopefully you're getting the point here. Data coming in, manipulating in a transformation, and then sending that data out now to the update change request ticket in a format that's acceptable to that. So data going out there. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So this is coming from the command template. So that command template task that was verifying that the interface is up is passing this data, and this data can be captured from documentation, or as you're building a workflow, you can capture this data from looking at the job as it's running, and then creating this format. So this is the format that the data is going to be passed in. So I'm using a couple more methods here to manipulate the data, and I want to walk you through these things. So in this case, I'm using a query command, which is available here under Workflow Engine. I drag that into here, and then I can say, okay, the source for this data is coming from here. So I'm going to get the entire object. So this, all the data that's available in here is going to be my source. And what do I want to query? This is using a JSON query. And I'm going to query the command results for the first element. This is an array, so I'm specifying element 0. Command results is here, is an array, as you can see. And then specifically, I want to pick out the device from that. And this is right here. So it's going to give me back a string of the device. Then, instead of mapping that directly to some other variable in an outgoing schema, what I'm actually doing is I'm taking the output of that and putting it into the input of another method. And here's our friend, the template literal again. So the template literal allows us to build a template, use variables from other sources of data. In fact, in this case, it's just a single source of data for the command template output, and then manipulate them to put them in a format that's useful for the next task later down the automation. In this case, it's going to be an update to the change request. So let's take a look at what that is. So we're using response, we're getting a name here, and we're getting the result here. So let's take a look at the template literal that I created. Here's what it looks like. Instead of being a human readable statement that we used earlier as part of our update to the short description, we're actually now configuring this to look more like a JSON object that is used to pass to the API call to update the change request ticket in ServiceNow. And that's what we're doing here. So I am updating a field called work notes. That's where all that updated documentation goes that we have to put in as we step and work through change requests. And I'm telling it, now this is more of a human readable format. I'm saying, this is the string to pass. This device, using this variable coming from the CT response, ran this command template. So we're identifying the command template that was run, and the actual results of the command template is this variable called CT result. So that gives us documentation to say, on this date, this automation ran, we made the network change, and we verified it by running this specific command template on this specific device, and it gave us this output, which ideally is passed, right? And we're going to update the ServiceNow notes accordingly to do that. So that's what we're doing here in this particular transformation. So then we do the update to the change request ticket with that data that we just manipulated and transformed past that. I'm going to do a pause here. So this is, this stops the execution so we can take a look at the ticket as it stands there. And then we're going to close that ticket out. It's showing you how we do the close by doing an update. So that's the entire workflow here. So let's go ahead and run it, and we can walk through it step by step. So when I start it, we can go and view the job in our job manager. Job manager shows us a step-by-step, play-by-play operation of what's going on. So the very first thing that happened was we opened the change request ticket. And if I click on this right here, this is where you can find out the incoming data. So we passed some incoming data to it. And remember all of that data that I said that the change request ticket spits out and that we identify in that transformation? Here's all that data, right? And the only things we really want are the ID numbers and things like that. So I'm going to close this out. So it finished that. Now that data is available because that task finished for our transformation later. But before we get to that, now we're asked to get input from a form. So again, that stops the execution of the automation waiting for us to manually enter this form information. And remember, this is the form we created in Form Builder, and I showed you earlier. And in this case, I've already pre-filled everything to make it a little bit easier and quicker. The only thing I need to enter is this. So I'm just going to set the port description here. And when I hit confirm, it's going to move forward in the automation and give us our next step. So now we've created the ticket. We've done the form. We have more information. This is our transformation task, and we've updated the ticket. So let's go into ServiceNow really quickly. Here's all my open tickets. We should see this new ticket at the very beginning, and we get at the very top. And so this is the data that was manipulated through our transformation task and turned into that, using that template literal, and turned into a human readable description that has actual elements of what's actually being asked to be done here. So we can see that the ticket was created. We actually, part of that transformation was and the update was to change this to the category to normal or to network. We've updated the short description. And if we go to planning, we see that through the form that was defined, we had these fields, and these fields get carried over, so they update the ticket. So all that data came from the form, manipulated by the transformation task that we had. So now if we flip back over to our job, we see we're paused here. And if I work this task, it's going to say, hey, this ServiceNow ticket isn't approved. When it is approved, click continue, because the very next thing is to actually make the network change. So let's flip back into ServiceNow, and let's just go through the approval process. So this would normally be the back-end approval process that's going on. Fortunately for a demonstration, we can move this very quickly through. So in hopefully less than a minute here, we will have everything approved and ready to go, which may be unlike your normal ServiceNow requests. That being said, it is what it is, and it's important. So this process is followed for a reason. And so we've gone through 2 levels of approval. We went to assess, authorize. Now, schedule is normally when we schedule these things when our maintenance window or whatever opens up so that we can make the change. I'm going to click implement, which is going to move this forward to the implementation phase, which is really where we can now start to make the network change. So in this case, this is what I call approved, right? And then after the change is made, you have a review, and then you can close the ticket out. So now let's go back to our job running here, since this is paused, since we've identified that we're now in an approved state. We can continue. The automation will now move forward. It will actually go make the network changes. From that, it will go and do the verification step. So that verifies that the network changes were made. And remember, the output of that verification step, we're going to use as an update to the ServiceNow ticket, so that we can update the notes to show that the verification step was made and that here is the status of that verification. We're also going to move forward in this update to go from implementation to review, because we've actually made the network change and verified it. So this finished out. Let's go back to our ticket, and let's go over here to notes. In our notes, this is what we've just added through that update. We added, remember that transformation, the template literal? We pulled data from the form data that we had earlier, and we now formatted it in a way that is acceptable to the ServiceNow update, which includes the work notes now, which gives us the real-time information of, on this particular router, this command template was run, and here is the result, true, which means passed. We also updated this. If you look at the timestamp here, it's the same timestamp. In the same update, we also updated the state. It was implement. Now we've moved it forward to review. And since that was a pass, we can close it, which is precisely what we do here. So this is a pause, just so we can have the ability to see what was going on. And now if I click go, it will finish the last step, which is to close the ticket out. And here we go. We go and reload. Status is update to close. We can look at the closure information, and that's been successfully updated as well. So that's how we've sprinkled all of that into our ServiceNow or our workflow, and sprinkled in ServiceNow. Again, opening and closing ticket, great, but updating becomes fundamentally things that you're going to over and over add into your workflow, especially as maybe this workflow spans changes across multiple network domains, multiple devices. You can update everything that's going on using transformations and the update change request functions in our platform. So now let's do this. Let's show this kind of the next evolution of this. And really, I've only changed 2 things, right, to make this a little more advanced in that sense. I've added 2 things. Actually, you can see here, here's the original. Flip back over. You can see I've added 2 things, and I've removed something at the bottom. So it's all about making things more efficient and moving forward in time, making your automations more efficient. So one of the things we've done here is we're following the same process. We're opening the ticket, getting input from a form, transforming that. But in this transformation stage, instead of going directly down here to update the ticket, We're also going to integrate with MS Teams as a child job to do a notification. And this notification is going to allow us to send a notification to your team saying in real time saying, hey, this ticket was open. Here's the ServiceNow link to that ticket. And here's some details on what was open on the nature of that ticket. So that again, that transformation that we looked at is going to format that in such a way so it's available to this child job. So we talked a little about everything else, but we haven't talked about child jobs yet. But this is the key part of how reusable all of these assets are in our system. We talked about the JSON form, right? That's a reusable asset. You can use that over and over and over again as necessary. Transformations become reusable, especially between two different applications that you're constantly manipulating data between. And also, entire workflows can be reusable. And in this case, I'm leveraging a workflow that isn't even mine. I'm leveraging a workflow that came from some of my colleagues in another part of the company that built this workflow just so it could make it easy to create Teams notification. And similarly here, when we talk about this, I'll show you this in a minute. So what does that look like? Let me close this out. Here is that workflow. Now it's stylized in our generation 1 canvas, but here's the cool thing. This was written in our generation 1 canvas, which is still usable because I'm executing and calling this workflow today. So I'm using a workflow that has been reusable for quite a while now because it serves a very useful function. I can pass to it the data that I want. It's going to use its own transformation here. This is a JSON schema transformation, or like I said, just called a transformation. Manipulate the data that's input into it, and then post that on an internal notification channel, Teams channel. And that's it. It's that simple thing. But now I don't have to embed that particular piece as 2 or 3 steps into my automation. I can reuse that. And we reused this over and over. So now I just have to use this transformation to pass the data that I want into it. And then it's going to do the Teams notification. The quality of life on this is fantastic because instead of now going back to ServiceNow and looking at open tickets, it actually tells me the ticket that it opened in something that I probably already have, an application that I already have open. And now the visibility isn't just for me, it can be for an entire team. So that's pretty cool. And that's how easy and flexible and making automations more efficient we want our users to understand. Okay, so from that, now we do our update ticket. And then the next thing that we've done a little bit differently here is remember, we had to wait. I paused the entire automation to wait to query, to wait to see that we were approved, meaning we got to the implementation step. I'm going to reuse a child job here to instead sit and hold in a loop, waiting getting the real-time status of the ServiceNow request for that particular ID, for that ticket, to see ourselves instead of me going and looking and reloading ourselves, to see letting the automation itself determine when implementation state has arrived. And this is, again, just for the sake of demonstration. We'll talk through that, but I wanted everybody to see this. So, because this is a more advanced thing. So let's take a look at this. Again, this is a child job, and this child job is part of our Gen 1 stylization and workflow type. But I want you to see it's very easy to follow here as well. So I'm leveraging this. And so what happens is this independent workflow gets called. We're actually doing same ServiceNow adapter and everything, but instead of updating anything, we've been writing, I guess in a sense you could say. Now we're reading. We are reading and we want to get the request by ID. There's that ID again. Well, where does that ID come from? Well, originally it came from that create change request ticket. And now we've manipulated that data, and now it's being passed into here through another transformation. And now I can leverage that, and I can query the status of this ticket. So when this outputs, it's going to say, okay, here's the information I have on this ticket. ServiceNow is going to respond. And one of those fields of data is, what's the state? We want to capture that state and evaluate it to see if it matches the correct state for implementation. If it does, great. We're going to move forward. That means we've got a green light to make changes. If it doesn't, it's going to do a slight delay here for 5 seconds and then query again. So let me pause right there and say this is not an ideal way you would necessarily implement this, right? But I want to illustrate it for a couple of reasons, two primary reasons. Number one, to show the flexibility of the platform. Okay. Network, especially as network teams start to build automations of the platform, they need to know what's possible and how it can be possible. This shows you the flexibility in doing this. So there's a lot of flexibility in how you do the network change itself and all the iterations and fallbacks and rollbacks and things like that. It's important to understand you have that same flexibility when you're working with IT systems as well. So it's just part of that logic, right? So ideally, you wouldn't necessarily do it this way, although you could potentially make it a little more user friendly. Because I look at it this way: um, if I'm already going to change to my ticket and hitting reload, how often am I doing that just to see if it's approved yet? Right? Maybe I'm already doing that. If I'm doing that, every 30 minutes, you could delay the job for 30 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever, right? That might make it more load friendly. Again, not ideal, but you can see you have opportunity here. But the second piece of this too is that this doesn't require any kind of interaction from the ServiceNow team. Okay. And that's critical to understand. ServiceNow is a big, complex platform with lots of pieces and parts. And so a more ideal way of doing this would be told by ServiceNow, hey, your tickets have been approved, right? And that way it's more of a push to us than us pulling data from it, right? So that's a little more friendly for resources and things like that. But that would require some interaction with ServiceNow, technical interaction with the ServiceNow team, things like that. And sometimes that's not possible right when you start off. Maybe you want to start off and do something like this, make it more tolerable, not as scalable for sure, but then eventually, yes, you would want to get to the point where you have a more efficient way of understanding those things. And that will lead us at the very end of our presentation today to have to get a little more insight into that. But anyway, again, admittedly, not necessarily the way you deploy this in production, but again, demonstration purposes only, to understand what's available and to know that this is something you can do without necessarily having to engage the ServiceNow team, with the view of at some point, let's make this more efficient and figure out the best way, or the way they've implemented the ability to push updates to external systems, because you can do that in Itential. All right, so that's that. So we query the state of it's going to sit in a loop until implementation is done. And then we actually do the rest of the things like we did before. We make network changes. We go all the way down here to update the ticket after the verification's done. And I took a step out here. This is the only thing I did here. I took a pause out because I want to go right from update to close ticket. And technically, this could be collapsed into one update because they're both update change requests. Just passing the correct state information to close a ticket, and passing the close information that it requires for ServiceNow to close a ticket. So this could be combined, but for demonstration, it's good to see them both as independent. All right. So that walks through all the changes here. It gets us to a more advanced state, gets us a little bit better quality of life. So we don't have to click into ServiceNow, at all, potentially. So let's run this and see how it goes. So going back to Job Manager again. So remember, we're going to create that ticket at first, right? We have no idea what the ticket number is, but it's going to hopefully identify that and let us know in our teams. So let's work this task, which is our form. And I'm going to update the description since it's not filled out and it's required, but everything else is filled out. I'm just going to keep it the same. Confirm that. So it's now going to move forward in the automation. So that next step is to go into MS Teams. And it also went ahead and updated the change request ticket. And now it's sitting in that query state loop. So what if I go to MS Teams here? I have 12:49 p.m. on my clock, and that's what matches here. So this is the one that just popped up. So again, we've transformed data. I've used a child job that was already existing from a colleague to now pass this information so that it shows up in a ServiceNow. Here's the webinar 2 description for the port. Gives us all of our information from the form and correctly formats a URL so that I can click and go directly to the ServiceNow ticket without doing a stare and compare to find out what ticket was created. So all of that came from all of those sources: create the ServiceNow ticket, the form data, and now manipulated so through a transformation so that it can be used in multiple tasks for multiple systems. So here we are, where we see all of our data inputted here, all of our planning, implementation plan, just like we did before. So the difference here is I can now go through the approval process again. And let's go ahead and do the rapid approval. So we'll just work through step by step, knowing that once we hit implementation phase, our automation is querying to see that we've hit implementation stage. So we're at assess now. Let's go to authorize, which requires another authorization. We'll approve that. Normally scheduling, we're going to push past that, assuming our schedule is now, like our Windows now. So as soon as I click this, implement, I can go back to our workflow, which is stuck in query CR state, looking for the update. And it moved forward. So it queried, found that it finally hit the implementation phase we were looking for through that child job. Now we're making the network change, manipulating the data so that we can run our verify command, which is that command template. And the output of that command template is going to be manipulated through transformation and sent to ServiceNow to update the notes, because we want to understand what was run on what and what the output of that status was. And then we update the ticket. We've actually moved it. We've updated the work notes plus moved it to the review state. And in this case, since I took the pause out, we've actually moved it forward to the close state. So then if I look at that ticket here, this is the ticket we just created with this workflow. I can look at the notes. Here's the output from the verification step that ServiceNow on that device came back true, so it passed. We pushed it from review, from implement to review, did that, and then we updated it from review to closed. And this will get updated when you reload to close state. And so that's how we've integrated everything into. We've integrated a network-focused automation, and now we've sprinkled in these ServiceNow API calls to help us do less in ServiceNow, less time spent in dashboards clicking around, and more time focusing on making our automations more efficient, creating quality of life, things like that. So the last thing I want to end on is we talked a little bit about how do we publish this out, and specifically, perhaps, how do we create a more efficient way of interacting with ServiceNow in regards to being pushed updates or being told updates versus us querying for updates, right? And so that's where we go into Operations Manager. Operations Manager is an area of the platform that allows us to publish automations once we've created them. So just as an example, this probably wouldn't be an ideal automation for this necessarily, but I'm going to use it as an example because this is the one we've just created, that second demo. I can create a name for it. I've created update router interface with ServiceNow updates. And the key thing here is I can create a series of different triggers for it. So let's say that we've worked with the ServiceNow team and they have an event notification system, like a message bus, right? Maybe it's using Kafka. And so I can create a trigger here that says, event from ServiceNow. I'm just giving it a name, and I can tell it event. And so the event, we can integrate the platform with the Kafka installation that presumably maybe ServiceNow is using, or it could be something else that we can integrate with. And now I can create the ability for an automation to get run in response to very particular updates that we get from there. And so we filter those updates through this schema filter. So this is a JSON object that defines what is it that we're looking at. And of course, the workflow would have to be intelligent enough to look at that data, parse out through a transformation, maybe the service, the ticket number, and then do the work based off of that, right? Understand what network changes. It was paused at a point, waiting for implementation. Now, instead of querying to move forward, now we're being told move forward, right? So you would manipulate your workflow a little bit to accommodate this different way of doing it, but the elements are going to be the same. And this is how you would do it. So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it, we could create another trigger here, and we could say, from a REST API call. And so we can actually associate this workflow to be run from a REST API external, using an API call from via REST from an external service. So it could be ServiceNow, it could be another script. Your DevOps people, you could publish a script to make a change on a particular network device and publish that as an API call that they can access through REST. And then you would fill out the required parts here. Um, we would create a route, which is the actual URL that it would be tied to. We can select a transformation. So a JST is a transformation, JSON schema transformation. We can select a pre-existing transformation to manipulate the data that we get from the API call. So whatever service or program is calling this API, we can manipulate the data to put it in the right format for our workflow. So it's using JSONs for that, for an external data as input. And then finally, you can create a schema to evaluate the data coming in and ensure that that you validate the data before you even run the automation. Right? We want to make sure the data is in the right format that we expect, and so that's available there as well. So you could save that, and now you have the ability to enable, disable these particular types of triggers, because these are two ways that we can also further integrate with ServiceNow. And we'll be talking about that in future sessions. And so that's how you can start today, take a workflow, um, identify areas where you can create efficiencies by leveraging ServiceNow API requests within your workflow, manipulating data to update very specific things in the workflow, and saving you tons of time. And then eventually getting to the point to making it more efficient, more integrated with ServiceNow, using advanced things like external API calls to your workflows, or even integration through some sort of event-driven notification systems. Again, I want to thank you guys so much for your time. And hopefully this was helpful to you. Rewatch it as many times as you can, and reach out to us if you have any questions or you want to learn more about the platform. Once again, thank you and have a great day.